The melody currently flowing through your headphones might feel like a sanctuary, but deep within your body, your cells could be telling a different story. Every day, through earbuds, car speakers, and the background hum of modern life, an invisible force is quietly reshaping your pulse and your thoughts without your consent. It is a subtle, persistent tension that vibrates beneath the surface of every pop hit, every news broadcast, and every cinematic score. This specific frequency may be keeping your nervous system in a state of perpetual, low-level emergency, a rhythmic friction that exists just beyond the reach of your conscious mind. You are listening to a world that has been tuned to a standard you never chose, inhabiting a sonic architecture that might be at odds with your own biology. Take a moment to consider the atmosphere of a crowded city. There is a specific frequency to the modern world, a collective resonance that often feels slightly off, like a string pulled just a fraction too tight. For centuries, musicians, philosophers, and healers believed that sound was the fundamental architecture of the universe. They tuned their instruments to the rhythms of nature, to the rotation of the planet, and to the mathematical harmony of the human heart. But in the middle of the 20th century, the world collectively agreed to change the channel. We moved away from the frequencies of the natural world and adopted a new global standard, 440 Hertz. This was the moment the machine began to dictate the rhythm of the soul. To the untrained ear, the difference between the traditional 432 Hz tuning and the modern 440 Hz standard is almost imperceptible. It is a mere 8 vibrations per second. However, in the realm of biophysics and psychoacoustics, that tiny gap might represent the difference between tranquility and turmoil. Some observers suggest that our modern musical standard acts as a biological irritant, a subtle psychological friction that keeps the human nervous system in a state of hypervigilance. We are essentially living in a world tuned to a frequency that may encourage a quiet, persistent sense of anxiety. This is the invisible backdrop of our lives, a sonic environment that demands we remain slightly on edge, never fully able to settle into the deep resonance of the earth. Before this global standardization, there was no single rule for how music should sound. A musician in Paris might tune his violin differently than a composer in Vienna. Many of the great masters, including Giuseppe Verdi, fought passionately to keep the tuning at a lower, more resonant level. They argued that the higher pitch strained the human voice and stripped music of its organic warmth. Verdi specifically advocated for 432 Hz, calling it the scientific pitch. To him, and to many who followed, this specific frequency wasn't just a preference, it was a mathematical reflection of the universe itself, aligned with the patterns found in everything from sunflowers to the spirals of distant galaxies. It was a sound that felt like it belonged to the living world rather than the factory floor. The shift began to solidify in the late 1930s. Amidst the rising tensions of a world preparing for massive conflict, international committees met in London to decide on a universal standard for pitch. They eventually chose 440 Hz. By 1953, the International Organization for Standardization made it official. On the surface, it was a triumph of industrial efficiency. It allowed instruments made in different countries to be played together perfectly and simplified the mass production of pianos and electronic equipment. It was a decision made for the machine, for the factory, and for the radio tower. But beneath the logistical convenience, some researchers wonder if we sacrificed our biological equilibrium for the sake of industrial uniformity. We traded the resonance of the organic for the synchronization of the assembly line. Consider the study of cymatics, how sound frequencies shape physical matter. When a plate of sand vibrates at 432 Hz, the grains often arrange themselves into intricate, beautiful geometric patterns, perfect mandalas that mirror structures found in nature. When that frequency switches to 440 Hz, some observations suggest the patterns can become jagged, chaotic, and disorganized. If our bodies are composed of 70% water, what does it mean to subject that water to a chaotic vibration for hours every day? If sound can shape sand and water, it is certainly interacting with the fluid and the electrical impulses within our own brains. We are walking vessels of water, constantly being rippled by the frequencies of an environment that may be out of sync with our internal geometry. Some hypotheses suggest that 440 Hz interacts with the human anatomy in a way that bypasses the rational mind and strikes directly at the limbic system, the seat of our fight or flight response. While a lower frequency might encourage the heart rate to slow and the breath to deepen, a higher, more aggressive 440 Hz pitch may stimulate a different response. It could be a subtle, constant nudge to the adrenal glands. In this state, we might become more reactive, more impulsive, and more susceptible to external influence. We become a society that is always on edge, always waiting for the next crisis, unable to find the off switch for our internal alarm systems. The music doesn't just play in our ears, it plays on our nerves, keeping us in a state of manageable agitation. Imagine a world where the very air is thick with this dissonance. It isn't just the music we choose to listen to. It is the hum of the refrigerator, the siren in the distance, the notification chime on your smartphone, and the background score of every advertisement designed to create a sense of urgency. When the nervous system is perpetually stimulated by these unnatural frequencies, the threshold for stress is lowered. Small problems feel like catastrophes. Differences of opinion feel like personal attacks. We risk losing the ability to achieve the deep, restorative states of consciousness that allow for true healing and profound reflection. We are living in a house where the foundation is vibrating at a frequency that feels like a warning we cannot quite decipher. Some researchers point to the fact that this standardization occurred exactly as the world was entering an era of unprecedented mass media. They argue that if a system required a population to remain in a state of constant, low-level distraction, it wouldn't need to use force. It would only need to change the background frequency of their lives. By keeping the collective vibration slightly out of sync with the natural world, a population might feel a constant, unnameable sense of lack. This vibrational hunger could make us easier to influence, more likely to seek out consumerist comforts, and less likely to tap into the intuitive clarity that comes with being in resonance with our environment. We are constantly searching for a harmony we cannot hear because we have been taught to accept the noise. There is a profound irony in the way we consume music today. We use it to relax, to exercise, and to escape, yet the very medium through which we consume it might be working against our ultimate well-being. The digital compression of modern audio further strips away the rich, organic overtones that once nourished the human ear, leaving behind a sterile signal that demands our attention without ever truly satisfying our biological need for harmony. We are listening to a ghost of music, a mathematical approximation that carries the hidden signature of tension. It is like eating processed food that fills the stomach but leaves the body starving for real nutrients. We are full of sound, yet we are sonically malnourished. The conflict between these two frequencies is not just a matter of music theory, it is a battle for the human internal landscape. One side represents the organic, the curved, and the resonant, the frequency of the Earth's heartbeat. The other represents the industrial, the rigid, and the engineered, the frequency of the machine. As we move further into a digital age, where sound is our constant companion, the stakes of this invisible dissonance continue to rise. We are participating in a global experiment in biological resonance, and we are only just beginning to see the results in our rising rates of collective exhaustion and mental fatigue. We are tired not because we have worked too hard, but because we have been vibrating too fast for too long. Think about the way you feel after a day spent in a modern office or navigating a busy city. Even if you haven't been physically active, there is a mental heaviness, a static in the brain that seems impossible to wash away. This is the sound of a nervous system that has been vibrating in a minor key. We have built cities of concrete and glass without always considering the need for green space, and we have built a world of sound without always considering the need for harmonic resonance. The 440 Hz standard is a reflection of an era that valued the mechanical over the organic. It is a world built on a grid, ignoring the soft curves and restorative rhythms of the natural world. What would happen if we changed the dial? There is a growing movement of artists and listeners who are returning to the natural pitch. They report a sense of immediate relief, a softening of the shoulders, and a clarity of thought that seemed impossible under the old standard. They describe it as finally coming home after a long journey through a noisy, crowded room. It suggests that our bodies have a memory of a different kind of sound, a more ancient and supportive vibration that we have been conditioned to forget. This is not just a trend, it is a reclamation of our sensory heritage. It is the realization that the world does not have to feel this way, and that our internal state is not entirely at the mercy of the external noise. It is important to look at this not as a grand, coordinated scheme, but as a systemic misalignment. In our rush toward progress and standardization, we often ignore the subtle requirements of our biological selves. We are sensory beings, tuned to the environment around us. If the environment is tuned to anxiety, we will mirror that anxiety in our cells and in our souls. The power of sound is the power of creation itself, and when that power is used to create a constant state of urgency, we lose our connection to the stillness at our core. We become echoes of a machine instead of voices of the earth. The challenge of the modern age is to find the harmony within the static. If you feel a sense of unease that you cannot explain, perhaps it is time to look at the invisible waves moving through the room. We are currently standing at a crossroads of consciousness. The tools to change our resonance are more accessible than ever before. We can choose to seek out the frequencies that align with the natural world, to retune our instruments and our lives to a more human scale. By doing so, we don't just change the music, we potentially change our internal chemistry. Preliminary observations suggest we might move out of the fight or flight response and into a state of rest and repair. We reclaim the sovereignty of our own nervous systems from the industrial standards that have governed them for nearly a century. The question remains, is the music you love a source of healing, or is it a psychological weight? Are the frequencies that fill your ears every day helping you to expand, or are they keeping you contained within a narrow band of stress? As we become more aware of the invisible forces that shape our reality, we begin to realize that our choice of pitch is one of the most fundamental choices we can make. It is the difference between living in a state of friction and living in a state of flow. We are not just listeners, we are participants in the symphony of the world. The notes we choose to emphasize will eventually become the reality we inhabit. The tension we feel is the sound of misalignment. Recognizing this is the first step toward finding our way back to the natural rhythm, to the frequency that doesn't demand our anxiety, but instead invites our peace. In the end, we must ask ourselves why we so readily accepted a standard that feels so foreign to our biology. Perhaps it was simply convenience. Perhaps it was a lack of awareness. Or perhaps it was a subtle recognition that a peaceful, resonant population is much harder to direct than one that is constantly vibrated by a low-level hum of urgency.
We're never gonna make it.
A calm mind is a sovereign mind, and sovereignty is rarely the primary goal of industrial efficiency. The next time you put on your headphones, remember that you are not just listening to a song. You are subjecting your entire physical and emotional being to a specific mathematical instruction. You are allowing a vibration to enter your blood, your bones, and your brain. In a world that seems increasingly designed to keep us on the edge of panic, choosing a different frequency might be a radical act of self-care. It is a quiet revolution, played out in the hidden chambers of the ear and the deep recesses of the heart, as we seek to find the one true note that brings us back to ourselves. It is a journey from the static of the modern world back to the clarity of the silence within. Consider the silence between the notes. Is it a peaceful silence, or is it charged with a static you can't quite hear but can certainly feel? The world is a symphony, but for a long time, we have been playing it in a key that doesn't quite fit our instruments. We have lived in a world where the background noise is a jagged edge, cutting through our ability to find stillness. This is the dissonance of the modern age, a world where the soundscape itself can feel like a prison of our own design. But every prison has a key, and for us, that key might just be a change in frequency. By changing the way we listen, we begin to change the way we live. We are entering a time where the invisible is becoming visible. We are beginning to understand that the geometry of sound is linked to the geometry of life. When we align our music with the natural world, we align ourselves with the source of our being. We stop fighting against the current and start moving with it. This is not just about music, it is about the fundamental way we experience reality. If we want to change the world, we might need to start by changing the frequency of the song we are singing. We must decide if we want to be part of the noise or part of the harmony. The resonance of our future depends on the choices we make today. Modern science may tell us that 440 Hertz is merely a matter of convenience, a logistical necessity for a globalized world. From a purely administrative standpoint, they are correct. It is efficient. It is uniform. It is easy to measure and easy to replicate. But efficiency is not always the same as harmony. The natural world does not operate on a grid of uniform efficiency, it operates on cycles, spirals, and intricate ratios that have sustained life for eons. When we force our biology into an industrial mold, there is always a potential cost. Some believe we pay that cost in the form of burnout, in the form of chronic fatigue, and in the form of a society that feels increasingly disconnected from the ground beneath its feet. We are trying to dance to a rhythm that doesn't match our heartbeat. We often talk about pollution in terms of smog in the air or plastic in the ocean, but we rarely talk about sonic pollution. We don't consider the impact of a world that never truly goes quiet, and when it is loud in the wrong key. This is the hidden conflict of our era. It is a struggle for the very rhythm of our hearts. Every time you choose to listen to something that resonates with your true nature, you are making a choice for a different kind of future. You are choosing to step out of the industrial machine and back into the organic flow of life. It is a small choice, but its ripples can change the way you perceive every moment of your existence. The revolution will not be televised, but it might be heard. It will be heard in the quiet moments when we choose resonance over dissonance. It will be heard when we realize that our well-being is not a commodity to be standardized, but a delicate instrument to be tuned with care. As you move forward through the noise of the day, remember that you are the conductor of your own internal orchestra. You have the power to choose the pitch. You have the power to decide which vibrations you allow to shape your soul. In a world that is vibrating at 440 Hertz, perhaps the most powerful thing you can do is find your own resonance and hold it steady. Consider the physical sensation of sound. It travels through the air as pressure waves, physically pushing against your eardrums and vibrating the small bones inside your ear. But it doesn't stop there. Those vibrations travel through your skull, through your spine, and into your very marrow. Sound is an invasive force. You cannot easily unhear a frequency once it has entered your space. This is why the standard matters. If the very air is vibrating at a frequency that mimics the signature of stress, your body will naturally attempt to match that frequency. It is a phenomenon known as entrainment. We become what we hear. We mirror the tension of the air around us until we forget what it feels like to be still. If we are entrained to a frequency of 440 Hertz, we are entrained to a frequency of the machine, precise, rigid, and relentless. If we seek out 432 Hertz, we are attempting to entrain to the frequency of the living world, breathable, fluid, and restorative. Small-scale studies have hinted at 432 Hz causing a slight decrease in heart rate and blood pressure compared to the standard pitch. While the scientific community continues to debate the magnitude of these effects, the anecdotal evidence from listeners is hard to ignore. They describe a softness in the sound, a feeling that the music is wrapping around them rather than pushing against them. It is the difference between the harsh glare of a fluorescent light and the gentle glow of the setting sun. As you conclude this journey through the world of sound, take one deep breath. Notice the silence of your own breath. That silence is the canvas upon which the world paints its noisy reality. You have the power to choose which colors and which frequencies are allowed on that canvas. The world may be tuned to 440 Hertz, but your heart has its own rhythm. Your soul has its own key. Finding the courage to listen for that hidden harmony may be the most important work of your life. In the quiet of your own mind, beneath the hum of the modern world, the frequency of your true self is waiting to be heard. Listen closely. It is the sound of home. It is the sound of your own resonance, finally finding its way back to the source.